inquiry underway in Sydney, Australia has uncovered disturbing information about child abuse within the Jehovah's Witnesses. Church representatives revealed that more than 1,000 members have been identified as child sexual abusers since 1950. The Commission learned that of those hundreds of cases, none was reported to police. An elder testified that its church practiced not to report sexual abuse, but rather to adopt a scriptural response to allegations. Emma Hannigan with Australia's SBS has been following the hearing. She joins us now live from Sydney. So Emma, this is a wide-ranging royal commission. It started with allegations of child sexual abuse into the Catholic Church, and now it's investigating the JWs, Jehovah's Witnesses. The evidence so far has been particularly damning.
It certainly has, Joan. I mean, the Royal Commission heard that, as you said, 1950, 1,006 alleged abusers have been identified to the Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, that was 1,006 people, not 1,006 cases, so we don't know how many cases were, but none of these were reported to authorities. Instead, what the church would do is they would investigate the claims themselves. This often involved bringing the abuser and their victims together to discuss their claims of abuse.
A victim, identified only as BCB, was groomed and sexually abused by Bill Neal, a respected elder, from the age of 15. When the abuse finally emerged, she was summoned to a meeting of elder men that included her abuser. Bill Neal, who's now dead, admitted the abuse.
I found the experience of reporting my abuse to a room full of men, including the man who had abused me, very distressing.
She was also asked not to discuss the abuse with anyone else out of respect for her abuser and his family.
Thinking back, I now see that I was being asked to respect the man who had done those things to me, but nobody was offering me any respect or proper support.
The Royal Commission heard that of the 1,006 alleged abusers identified to the Jehovah's Witnesses since 1950, not one single person had been reported to police. This evidence was borne out by the testimony of one of the church elders, who himself had investigated a case of abuse.
And what about telling other authorities? Are you aware of your obligations if someone tells you of a serious allegation of sexual assault?
Well, we don't report it to the police. I think we encourage them to do that, but we give them the assistance to do that if they need that.
Church elders could now face criminal charges for concealing the abuse. The Commission also heard that the church only believed victims if the alleged abuser confessed or there were two witnesses.
The requirement that there be two or more witnesses has prevented at least 125 allegations of child sexual abuse from proceeding to a judicial committee.
The hearing into the Jehovah's Witnesses is expected to continue for 2 weeks.
The Commission heard from another elder today who also investigated BCB's case. It was told that when he was informed the woman was considering bringing her story to the Royal Commission, he asked what that would accomplish other than dragging Jehovah's name through the mud. Now, he has admitted that this wasn't perhaps the most sympathetic approach to take.
But also today, the Commission has been dealing with the actual response by church elders when young women allege that they were sexually abused by members of the church.
Well, church elder today, Joe Bellows, said that the church recommends a biblical response to the trauma caused by sexual abuse. The Commission heard from two abuse survivors who felt so unsupported by the church that they had both attempted suicide. Now, they say that they've never been offered any compensation, they were never offered any counselling, and the church themselves has said that perhaps this is something that they need to consider. But they certainly aren't jumping to commit to anything at the moment.
Emma Hannigan there with Australia's SBS reporting live for us in Sydney. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, John.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Your Honour. As Your Honour is aware, the witness this morning is Mr. Jeffrey Jackson. There is an appearance to be noted on his behalf.
Could I announce my appearance on behalf of Mr. Jackson Brown?
Sorry,
Mr. Brown. Yes.
Yes, you have leave.
Thank you.
Mr. Jackson, you need to be sworn.
Yes, Your Honour.
Do you have a Bible there?
I certainly do.
Would you take the Bible in your hand, please, and repeat after me? I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission.
That the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission.
Shall be the truth.
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Yes, thank you. Take a seat again, please.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Stewart.
As Your Honour pleases. Mr. Jackson, will you state your full names and your work address, please?
Yes, my name is Jeffrey William Jackson, and I work at 25 Columbia Heights, but the mailing address is 124 Columbia Heights, Brooklyn, New York.
Now, you've said that the governing body presently has 7 members. I withdraw that. How is it determined how many members there will be from time to time?
There can be any number of members on the governing body. In the past few decades, for example, when I was appointed on the governing body, there were 12 of us. I believe the number has been 18 at one stage. But the qualifications of a member for the governing body involves someone who is considered an anointed witness, who has worked in scriptural, with a scriptural background, either as a missionary or a full-time servant for many years, and is able to fulfill the role of the governing body, which is, and may I state, a spiritual group of men who are the guardians of our doctrine. And as guardians of the doctrine, look at things that need to be decided based on our doctrines, which are based on the Constitution of the Bible.
Now, in making decisions on the publications, I understand from what you say is that you're guided by the scriptures.
That is correct.
And that involves, obviously, interpreting the scriptures from time to time.
That is the role of the governing body.
And am I right in understanding that the governing body's interpretation of the scriptures on any particular point might change or develop from time to time?
That is correct as well.
So I think some examples might be, for example, firstly, the question of blood fractions and whether that is or isn't covered by the prohibition for the receipt of blood transfusions.
That is correct as well, but if I could just mention, when blood transfusions were first introduced, there wasn't a lot of options with regard to blood fractions.
Yes, but my point is, or what I'm seeking to understand, is there was an interpretation at one point which said that members of the Jehovah's Witnesses should not receive blood fractions, but in more recent times it's been accepted, as I understand it, that there's no specific scriptural direction on that, so on blood fractions, that is, so that's a matter for the individual conscience of Jehovah's Witnesses.
That's right, and Mr. Stewart, if I may mention, this is an example of the desire of the governing body not to go beyond the scriptures. Clearly we have the direction in Acts chapter 15, 28 and 29 against blood. But if I could also mention, you see, as with anything in the community, more and more knowledge becomes available medically. It can be very overwhelming trying to see all the latest medical research and so on. But the governing body tries to make sure that they don't go beyond what is written. If we see that a direction from the scriptures has perhaps been used too broadly, then we're the first ones to try to correct that.
You've got the Bible there. If you go to 1 Timothy chapter 3,
yes,
verse 4, there's a discussion of a man presiding over his household, having his children in subjection. Now, what does that mean?
That's a very good question, Your Honour. Biblically speaking, the word subjection infers respect and a willingness to comply with direction. It does not.
Your Bible then provides a reference back to Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4.
That is correct.
Which imposes the obligation on fathers to bring their children up in the discipline and admonition of Jehovah. What's the discipline of Jehovah?
So, Your Honour, the original language word there, discipline, it indicates a process of teaching, educating, making a disciple.
Well, from that reference in Ephesians, your Bible takes us back to Proverbs chapter 13, verse 24.
Proverbs 13:24, yes.
And the exact quote is, "Whoever holds back his rod hates his son." What does that mean?
So, Your Honour, you'll notice there's an asterisk there on the term rod, and you see the footnote, discipline or punishment. So, in the application of this, the term rod is used as a symbol or a metaphor to indicate the authority to give some punishment. For example, in a modern day setting, my father could say to me, I don't go to the movies because I had broken some of the rules of the home.
So it's not about inflicting corporal punishment then?
It absolutely is not about inflicting corporal punishment.
It would have been when first written, wouldn't it?
How people applied it back then at that time, of course, is open to question.
Well, what you're telling me, as I understand it, is that your religion, your church, is prepared to interpret the Bible having regard to contemporary social attitudes and standards. Is that right?
Obviously, Your Honour, we need to take that into consideration, but the primary responsibility we have is to think, what does Jehovah God mean by this? And we look at other scriptures. One of the problems that many folk have when they read the Bible is they take one verse and they assume it means something out of context or not in reference to other scriptures. So for our understanding, Jehovah has said that children should be raised in a loving environment. Jesus was raised in such an environment.
Well, I've taken you to the way your own church constructs the biblical references, which, as we've noticed, takes us back to Proverbs. Correct?
That is correct.
But what you've given us is the understanding which your church now has about how that's to apply in contemporary society. Is that right?
That's a good question. Obviously, I can only speak about what we understand this to mean now, but I would argue the case that even back in ancient times, God did not have in mind for children to be beaten up in a bad way.
Does your church accept corporal punishment of children?
Our church accepts the family arrangement and expects that parents have the responsibility to discipline and raise their children.
That doesn't answer my question. Do you accept corporal punishment?
In our literature, I think you'll see time and time again, we've endeavoured to explain that here, discipline is referring to more a mental point of view.
I regret to tell you, you're still not answering my question. Sorry. Do you accept corporal punishment?
No.
You don't?
Not personally, no. And not as an organisation. We don't encourage it.
Now, and I'm sure you know of the concerns expressed by the women who have given evidence in this hearing about the confrontation and difficulty in that confrontation which they found in approaching a male dominant structure. You understand that?
I do understand that, Your Honour.
Is there room for the church to change that?
That's a very good question. I'm glad you asked that. Is there a chance to make elders women or make women elders? No. There is no leeway there. But, Your Honour, if I could just mention...
Why is that? Can you tell me why that is?
Sure, yes. If we turn to first...
Is it because of a literal application of the Bible?
Your Honour, it goes back to the theme of the Scriptures right from the creation of Adam, right through Israelite times, to the Christian era. But in all fairness, may I just say something with regard to that?
Oh, certainly.
You see, the role of women in the Jehovah's Witness religion is a very dignified role. We don't make women, well, we certainly do not want women to feel like second-rate citizens. In God's view, men and women are equal. But even people who fly aeroplanes realize you can't fly an aeroplane by committee. There has to be a pilot and a co-pilot. And that's the Bible arrangement, not because of any lack of intelligence or lack of ability on the part of women. It is an arrangement that has stood the test of time. Now, within that arrangement, the Bible clearly states that a man does not have absolute authority over a woman, and a woman is a co-worker, a complement, the Bible refers to as that. So I think in the context of understanding how women are treated among Jehovah's Witnesses, I think if you investigate it further, you would see there are very many happy women in the marital arrangement.
It used to be the case that all of our women were, all of our pilots were women, wasn't it? We've changed that.
All of our pilots were. Did we?
Were men.
All men?
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, but we're men, yes.
Yeah, we're men, and we've changed that now, and we have women who are pilots. Why couldn't the church accept that women can contribute to the decision-making processes, particularly in relation to allegations of sexual abuse brought forward by women?
The answer, Your Honour, is that we expect women to be involved in that. But in the actual role as elders within the Christian congregation, there is a very firm standard set there. There is no leeway whatsoever for that in the belief of Jehovah's Witnesses. But if I could mention, some of the reports that you've considered are from 25 years ago. And if I understand correctly from what little I heard of the Commission in the last few days, Mr. Spinks very accurately described that there has been more an awareness of Jehovah's Witnesses to make sure that any victim who has been a victim of a horrible crime does not be required to actually go before three men. We've made changes, Your Honour, because those changes in the actual technicalities of the policies don't change. They're not affected by the actual Bible principles, except the very important principle of showing love, empathy and concern, and trying to avoid any form of trauma. And that's our desire. If it wasn't perfect before, which it wasn't, we've tried to change that. And we will make further changes when we consider the recommendations of the Commission. But also, if I can just highlight, any victim is not viewed as someone that needs to stand before a judicial committee. They did not do anything wrong. They're the ones that have been victimised. They need the help. Now, to answer your question directly, women can be involved in this very sensitive area. But biblically speaking, the role of judges in the congregation, it lays with men. That's what the Bible says, and that's what we endeavour to follow.
Can you give me the reference for that?
Yes.
That is judges being only men. Not elders, but judges being only men.
Okay, I would have to check it. I think Deuteronomy is one of them. But with regard to 1 Timothy chapter 3, 1 Timothy chapter 3, and I'm sure Your Honour, you're very familiar with this. In verse 1, the statement is trustworthy. If a man is reaching out to be an overseer, he is desirous of a fine work. The overseer should therefore be irreprehensible, a husband of one wife, moderate in habit, sound in mind, orderly, hospitable, qualified to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but reasonable, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money, a man presiding over his own household in a fine manner, having his children in subjection with all seriousness. In biblical times, the same expression that is used for elder is also used for older man. And when we're translating, of course, that is my field, sometimes it is hard to decide whether it means elder as in a position or older man. But definitely when it speaks of judges at the gates in Israel, we're talking about older men. But I apologize, Your Honour, seeing that you asked this question, I cannot give you the exact scriptural reference, but we'll be happy to do that.
We would appreciate it, because one possible modification to meet this issue of the lack of women as judges of allegations brought forward by women against men may be a modification of your process to include women in the judicial determination step. You understand?
I do understand, Your Honour, and we will make sure you get those references.
And can you understand how a woman, a young woman, any woman might feel when allegations which she makes of having been sexually assaulted by a male are determined exclusively by men?
In the context of a police station, I can understand that, Your Honour, but please, may I also mention the role of these elders. They are friends of those in the congregation. Their role is to shepherd, help, care for. And so although perhaps a young person may feel that way, and we would do everything we can within the Bible parameters to make sure that that is eased so that a person isn't put in that very difficult situation.
Well, you gave us a scripture, 1 Timothy 3 verse 1, which as I understood it was the authority for the principle that, as it's put there, an overseer, but in, I think, modern language, an elder must be a man. Is that right?
That's correct.
And is there a scriptural reference, and perhaps this is the one you said you'd need to come back to us on, is there a scriptural reference which says that the investigation of allegations of serious misconduct must be done by an elder?
If I could just clarify your question a little, Mr. Stewart. You see, what I think you've heard in the Commission is that we have said that women can be involved in all these various aspects leading up to the actual decision-making, whether or not someone is spiritually qualified to remain in the congregation. So just that one aspect, the actual judicial committee itself, is where we believe that men would be involved.
Well, Mr. Jackson, that's the question I was putting to you, you see. I was wondering whether you could have a structure which meant that the judicial decision as to whether or not the allegation was true could be determined by a body capable of having women represented on it, and that body's decision would then be taken to the elders in relation to decisions to disfellowship. Do you understand?
I understand that, Your Honour.
Well, is it possible to make that change?
It is possible to make sure that elders are fully aware of the whole story. But for women to be elders in the congregation, that is not possible.
No, Mr. Jackson, I wasn't asking you that. I was asking you to consider. Sorry. I was asking you to consider whether the process may involve a determination which we outside the church would call a judicial determination. That is the allegation true or false? And then that decision having been made, the elders would then make a decision as to the consequence, being disfellowship or otherwise. Do you understand?
I do understand.
Could women be involved in the determination of whether or not the allegation is true?
Well, Your Honour, if I could say, I think they already are involved.
Not in the decision, not in the decision, Mr. Jackson. Please address my question.
Okay. Yes, well, please, could I just use an example? If an underage child it says that something has happened, and then two women are involved with helping that person, surely they have to decide whether or not the facts are true and present those to the elders. Otherwise, how would the elders know what the facts are?
Mr. Jackson, you're not dealing with my question.
I'm sorry, I apologise.
Would you like me to put it again? Would you like me to put it again?
If you would, please.
Your process at the moment has a judicial determination which is made by the elders. And that's the point at which a decision is made as to whether the allegation is true or false. Do you understand that?
Mm-hmm.
You do?
I do understand that, Your Honour.
Is it possible for the process to be modified so that that decision can be made by a body which could include women? That is, the decision as to whether or not the allegation is true or false, made by a body which could include women, and that decision would thereafter be acted upon and a decision made as to whether or not to disfellowship by the elders. Do you understand?
I do understand, and I apologise, Your Honour, for not answering directly. I didn't understand fully what you were saying. The answer, Your Honour, is such a situation would be worthy of us considering and doing research and checking the scriptures. Yes, the possibility of considering that is there.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I apologise again.
Mr. Jackson, I'd like to refer you to Shepherd the Flock of God, which is tab 120 at page 71, ringtail 72. Now, this is the manual for elders, and it's been applicable since, as I understand it, 2010. Is that right?
This is, yes, that appears to be the case.
And would it be the case that this manual came through the processes of the writing committee?
This manual would have been prepared with the help of the service departments, and the service committee would have prepared this information. And yes, the writing committee wouldn't have needed to read everything and check to see it scripturally applicable.
Yes. And what I'm showing you page 71, but that's in chapter 5, which is headed determining whether a judicial committee should be formed. And it starts out by setting out various wrongdoings, serious ones, including manslaughter, attempted suicide, veneer, and so on. So that's the context. But you'll see at paragraph 37, it says, even though a Christian has been accused of wrongdoing serious enough to require judicial action, a judicial committee should not be formed unless the wrongdoing has been established. And the word established is in italics. So my question is, who is it who decides whether the wrongdoing has been established?
So it is my understanding that two elders normally would investigate the matter to see if there is some substance to the accusation, having in mind, as you mentioned, this could be ranging from someone getting drunk to someone committing immorality and so on. So those two elders would at least see if there was some basis of the accusation, and they would get back to the body of elders, who then would appoint the judicial committee.
Mr. Jackson, let's make it a little more concrete then, in a very specific example. Now, you'll know that one of the things that's emerged in the last couple of weeks, that in Australia at least, amongst the Jehovah's, or in the Jehovah's Witness organisation, there's a practice of not reporting child sexual abuse allegations to the authorities unless required by law to do so. Do you accept that?
I'm not familiar with the statistics or the general practice, but I can tell you why there is a spiritual dilemma because of this question.
Well, that's what I'm driving at. So perhaps you can address that question specifically, which is this: is there a scriptural basis to that policy being, or practice being, not to report child sexual abuse allegations to the authorities unless required by law to do so?
Thank you for the opportunity to explain this. I think very clearly Mr. Toole pointed out that if the Australian government and all the states was to make mandatory reporting, it would make it so much easier for us. But the ethical, or the, let's say the spiritual dilemma that an elder has is to consider, how did he get the information that he has been told? Now, there's a scriptural principle in the book of Proverbs, chapter 25, and I'm not saying, Mr. Stewart, that any one of these principles takes precedent, but it is something that the elder would need to take into consideration. So Proverbs 25, verses 8 through 10. That's on page 905. That's Proverbs 25, 8 through 10. Do not rush into a legal dispute, for what you will do later. For what will you do later if your neighbor humiliates you? Plead your case with your neighbor, but do not reveal what you were told confidentially, so that the one listening will not put you to shame and you spread a bad report that cannot be recalled. Now, I'm not saying, Mr. Stewart, this is the only factor, but it is one factor that all ministers of religion have grappled with when it comes to an issue such as this. The second issue is that elders are told, as is mentioned in 1 Peter and the 5th chapter, this is on page 1625, 1 Peter chapter 5, and verses 2 and 3. Have you got it, Mr. Stewart?
I do.
Yes. Shepherd the flock of God under your care, serving as overseers, not under compulsion, but willingly before God, not for love of dishonest gain, but eagerly, and then this is the point, not lording it over those who are God's inheritance, but becoming examples to the flock. The point being here, another aspect that an elder needs to consider is he does not have the authority to lord it over or take over control of a family. So if the government does happen to make mandatory reporting, that will make this dilemma so much easier for us, because we all want the same goal, that children will be cared for properly, that the rules for evidence for a judicial hearing involve 2 witnesses. But please allow me to say further, this is only talking about setting up a judicial committee. It doesn't mean to say that Jehovah's Witnesses would feel that someone is totally 100% squeaky clean just because there was only one witness to the crime.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by 100% squeaky clean. I mean, the reality is if there's only one witness in the case of child sexual abuse, then it cannot be taken further by the elders. And as it's put in the literature, it's left in the hands of Jehovah.
Yes, but please may I correct your comment on that with all due respect. You see, by squeaky clean, I'm meaning that it's not like someone being exonerated by a judicial hearing whereby there's double jeopardy and they can't be taken before the judicial hearing again. Our literature has said, and we agree, that in most cases with children with child abuse, they are telling the truth. That's an established thing. They're not making up these stories. So immediately the elders would put into place protection measures to help, to make sure that the family cares for the child and that due steps are taken to protect the child.
Familiar, and perhaps we can go to Deuteronomy 22, 23 to 27.
Deuteronomy 22, 23 to 27.
Page 304. So where it said that if a man is found lying down with a woman who is the wife of another man, both of them must die together. Now, let me just preface this. I'm not addressing the question of the stoning. I'm addressing the question of evidence. The man who lay down with the woman as well as the woman. Sorry, I read that badly. Both of them must die together. The man who lay down with the woman as well as the woman. So you must remove what is bad out of Israel. Then it says, if a virgin is engaged to a man and another man happens to meet her in the city and lies down with her, you should bring them both out to the gate of that city and stone them to death. The girl, because she did not scream in the city, and the man, because he humiliated the wife of his fellow man. So you must remove what is evil from your midst. And then the next example is the one I'm particularly interested in. If, however, the man happened to meet the engaged girl in the field, and the man overpowered her and lay down with her, and the man who lay down with her is to die by himself, and you must do nothing to the girl. The girl has not committed a sin deserving of death. This case is the same as when a man attacks his fellow man and murders him, for he happened to meet her in the field, and the engaged girl screamed, but there was no one to rescue her. So the point of this last example is that there's no second witness, is there? Because the woman's in the field, she screamed, but there was no one to rescue her. Do you accept that?
Could I explain, Mr. Stewart, that, you see, I think already under testimony, some of Jehovah's Witnesses have explained that the two witnesses needed can be, in some cases, the circumstances. I think, was it an example given?
I'll come to that, Mr. Jackson.
Okay, so
we'll get through this a lot quicker and easier if we just address it one step at a time. So the present step...
So the answer to your question?
The present step is this, is that in that example you accept it's a case where there was no other witness beyond the woman herself.
There was no other witness except the woman herself, but added to that were the circumstances.
Yes, well, the circumstances were that she was raped in the field.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but they were circumstances.
And it was sufficient, there being only one witness, it was nevertheless sufficient for the conclusion that the man should be stoned to death.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now, is it...
I think we're agreeing on the point.
Yes, is it not the case that had Jesus been asked about a case of sexual abuse, he may have referred back to this part of Deuteronomy and said that it's not required to have two witnesses?
I certainly would like to ask Jesus that, and I can't at the moment. I hope to in the future. But that's a hypothetical question which if we had an answer, then we could support what you said.
Now, as I understand it, people who no longer want to be known as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, but who have been, must then dissociate. Is that right?
No, not necessarily. I meet many people in my travel that perhaps were Jehovah's Witnesses at one stage, but then have decided no longer to be active, as they haven't gone through a formal process.
Well, I've chosen my words deliberately, Mr. Jackson.
Okay.
If someone no longer wants to be known as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, they must then dissociate. Yes. Is that right?
Well, again, please, if they want to take the action of doing that, but of course they have total freedom if they don't want to apply to officially be removed as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, they can tell anyone they want that they're no longer a Jehovah's Witness.
Well, I'll come back to that, but perhaps I can take you to tab 109, page 155. So this is the manual organised to do Jehovah's will.
Is this the section on disassociation?
Yes, that's right. So this is a manual which is issued to all baptized Jehovah's Witnesses. Is that right?
That is correct.
And this
let me clarify, to be precise, those who are approved to go from door to door.
Okay, I see. So all baptized Jehovah's Witnesses would be guided by this, but in addition, you say some who are not yet baptized may also have a copy of this.
That is correct.
Thank you, yes. All right, so affiliation applies to the action taken by a person who, although a baptized member of the congregation, deliberately repudiates his Christian standing, rejecting the congregation by his actions, or by stating that he no longer wants to be recognized as or known as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So is it the case then that someone who no longer wants to be recognized as or known as one of Jehovah's Witnesses must then disassociate?
No, it doesn't say they must do anything. If you read on, you'll see there's a process. This gives the person the right to officially have an announcement made that they're no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses. But as I already said, if they decide they don't want to exercise that right, they don't automatically come under this provision.
People who don't exercise that right are then, in other words, they, as you described, inactive. They're still subject to the rules and discipline of the organisation, aren't they?
I would have to check on that because personally that's not my field. But my understanding is if a person has made it known by their actions in the community over a period of years that they're not witnesses, we would only hold any reports in abeyance until they decided they wanted to return.
Well, Mr. Jackson, I have to say that my understanding is if someone in that position is caught transgressing one of the rules, then they would still be subject to the disciplinary procedures, including possibly disfellowshipping. Is that not right?
That is a possibility, but in all fairness to your question, I think there are circumstances that I couldn't make a definitive comment on that.
Yes. And so, for example, if they had become inactive or sought to fade without formally dissociating, and the elders came to visit and found them celebrating Christmas or a birthday, they would be found to be in transgression of the rules, would they not?
That is not my understanding, but again, as I said, it's not my field. That goes into policy with regard to those type of things. But from my personal experience, that's not the case.
Well, you say it's not your field, but you remember the governing body, which is responsible, as you've said, for the whole field, and you've been a member for 10 years, and all the committees are responsible to and accountable to the governing body. So
that is correct.
So it is your field, isn't it?
Only as far as approving the basic scriptural principles. So is there a scriptural principle that you have in mind you want to ask me about, or are you talking about policies and implementation of policies? So there is a difference there.
Yeah, and the policies are all subject to the scriptural principles, aren't they?
Yes, and if you have a question on the scriptural principle, I'm very happy to try and explain it.
And for that reason, the policies have to be approved by the governing body to ensure that they are in keeping with scriptural principles.
That's correct. But the fact that the policies at times need to be changed shows that there is leeway there.
And if it's not the case, as you seem to suggest might be a possibility, although you say you don't know, if it's not the case that someone who has not actively disassociated but merely sought to fade or become inactive is not governed by the rules, then where's the line drawn between those who are subject to the rules and those who aren't?
That's a good question, and that's where judgment comes in. By judgment, I mean using a person's nous as to is someone still perceived as one of Jehovah's Witnesses in the community.
Well, isn't that the point, that if someone is perceived as one of Jehovah's Witnesses in the community, that's because they have not disassociated or been disfellowshipped?
Well, it has to do with what the person is telling other persons.
Well, there's no middle road, is there? I mean, you're either a member and subject to the organisation, or you're not. Isn't that the case?
Yes, but I thought you were asking me about disassociation.
Well, I am indeed. So if someone hasn't disassociated but has sought merely to become inactive or to fade, they're then still subject to the organisation's discipline and rules.
If they acknowledge being one of Jehovah's Witnesses.
And if they do the contrary, which is to say they're not one of Jehovah's Witnesses, the effect of that is disassociation.
That's if they decide to go down that course.
And if they don't actively disassociate, then they will be disfellowshipped as apostates.
No, an apostate is someone who actively goes against what the Bible teaches.
Well, if the elders come on the door to a former member to a member who's been inactive and sought to fade away, and says, "Well, are you still a Jehovah's Witness or not?" and the person says, "Well, no, I don't want to be a Jehovah's Witness," the consequence of that will be either disfellowshipping or disassociation, won't it?
No, I don't agree with that. Not from what I've seen. Can I just say this hypothetical situation, which is probably a one that could happen. Two elders call at the door of someone. They're not going to come out and say, "Hello, I'm celebrating Christmas." It presupposes that Jehovah's Witnesses have some sort of spy network to monitor these people, which we don't. But if that person says, "Look, I was baptized as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, but I'm no longer active," no doubt the elders will say, "Well, we would encourage you to return. Is there anything we can do to help you?" Now, in that process of them returning, if they feel prompted to say that they have been living a lifestyle that is contrary to what Jehovah's Witnesses would live, then certainly we would handle that. Yes, but if I can mention, Mr. Stewart, your first proposition you put forward, that they meet someone who's celebrating Christmas. This person is not associating with other Jehovah's Witnesses, not actively trying to change other people and so on. A person such as that is not going to be handled judicially, as far as I understand. Sorry, I have to disagree with you.
Well, no, but Mr. Jackson, you're disagreeing on the example of what they do wrong. And that's not my point. My point is they may do nothing wrong, but they're still subject to the rules of the organisation in the event that at some point they do something wrong.
I will agree with that, but I don't agree with the sweeping statement they only have the two choices. Well, that was the point I was disagreeing with.
Well, it's right then, isn't it? Because if they don't want to be subject to the discipline and rules of the organisation, then they have to leave by actively dissociating. Isn't that the truth?
That's if they definitely don't want to be, yes.
And, Mr. Jackson, you've put it that they have a choice to leave or not to leave. For someone who wants to leave, perhaps because they've suffered abuse by someone in the organisation and don't feel that it's been treated properly or adequately, it's a very difficult choice, isn't it? Because they must choose.
I agree with that.
And it can be a very cruel choice for them, not so?
I agree. It's a difficult choice.
And it can be personally devastating because they can lose their whole social network and their families.
That can be the case, yes.
Would you accept then that putting people to that choice through this system of disassociating from them, or shunning as it's sometimes referred to, is contrary to the Jehovah's Witness belief in freedom of religious choice?
No, I don't accept that. I think you're jumping to a conclusion there, but I understand that you have that opinion.
Well, on what basis do you not accept that?
Because right throughout the arrangement with Jehovah's Witnesses, people have to make choices based on their own free will. For example, to be baptized. If someone walks up to us and says, I want to get baptized, we're not going to allow them to be baptized. They have to, first of all, understand the arrangement of Christian living. Usually it takes 1 or 2 years for them to go through both the publications that we have, so that they personally can make that commitment. So that is a choice that they made. Now, we are not forcing them in any ways to remain in our organisation. But a point to remember is that the ultimate standard that we believe in is the Bible, and we feel it's good for people to live by the Bible. The fact that many who have been disfellowshipped return of their own free will is an indication that they likewise still believe that it's a good lifestyle.
Mr. Jack, you were baptized at age 13, am I right?
I certainly was, yes.
And there are, in fact, many Jehovah's Witnesses who are baptized at an age even younger than that.
There have been some I have met that have been baptized younger.
And do you consider that at that age, someone is old enough and mature enough to make a decision affecting the rest of their lives?
Yes, I do in some cases. Obviously, there are some children that wouldn't be able to make that decision. And perhaps some would have questioned whether I could make that decision at 13 years of age. But I've worked with people that have been baptized when they were 11, and they have stuck by that determination their whole life.
Well, that may be because they can't leave the organization without leaving behind everyone whom they know.
Anything is possible.
You see, let's take someone who's baptized at a young age and then as lie elsewhere, and they want to choose some other system of belief. They're then still going to be faced with the stark choice that we've identified, aren't they?
That's true.
So on that basis, I suggest to you that that policy and practice of your organization is in conflict with the Jehovah's Witnesses' belief, as you've said it is, in freedom of religious choice.
No, we don't see it that way, but you're entitled to your opinion.
And I suggest also that it's in conflict with the idea of a loving and a compassionate God.
Certainly, that wouldn't be in harmony with the Bible, what the Bible says, because at times Jehovah disciplined his people by having them go into exile, come back. So Jehovah is someone who believes in the ultimate overall benefit or good for persons, and sometimes that includes some form of discipline.
And do you accept that putting people to that choice makes your organization in many respects a captive organization?
I do not accept that at all.
Is there a scriptural basis to this policy of shunning?
Yes. Thank you very much for the opportunity to express it. 1 Corinthians is the scripture, and no doubt you've seen it already. But 1 Corinthians, that's on page 1530.
Can you just identify?
And in this, 1 Corinthians chapter 5, and starting at verse 1, it speaks of a situation where there was sexual immorality in the congregation in Corinth.
Sorry, Mr. Jackson, I'm really just asking, is there a scriptural basis, and you've identified what it is? Because my next question is can it change? In other words, is there a basis upon which you foresee that your organization might be able to change that policy?
No.
Now, do you recognize Mr. Jackson, and in asking this question, let me make it clear, I'm not suggesting it's peculiar to the Jehovah's Witness organisation. There are many, many organisations in this position. But do you accept that the Jehovah's Witness organisation has a problem with child abuse amongst its members?
I accept that child abuse is a problem right throughout the community, and it's something that we've had to deal with as well.
And you accept, of course, that your organisation, including people in positions of responsibility like elders, are not immune from the problem of child sexual abuse?
That appears to be the case.
And do you accept, Mr. Jackson, that many of the efforts that are being made by different people and organisations to highlight the issue of child sexual abuse and try and find solutions are genuine efforts to improve the situation?
I do accept that, and that's why I'm happy to testify.
And that such efforts are not necessarily an attack on your organisation or its system of beliefs?
We understand that too.
You described earlier in your testimony that the work of this Royal Commission is beneficial. Do you accept then that the Royal Commission's efforts are genuine and well-intentioned?
I certainly do. And that's why we came into the Royal Commission hoping that collectively something would come forward that would help us as well as everybody else.
And would you disagree then with anyone who said that the efforts to highlight and deal with child sexual abuse in the Jehovah's Witness Church is engaging in apostate lies?
I guess that's a broad question, because sometimes those who make these accusations make many other accusations as well. But let me assure you, the person making the accusation is not the main thing. The main thing is there some basis to the accusation? And if there is some way that we can improve, the governing body is always interested in seeing how we can refine our policies.
We'll do everything we can to support it.
If a different crime, to take the most extreme murder, if you were told that a member of the congregation had killed someone else, would you report that to the police?
We would encourage the person to do that.
Would you do it yourself?
No, I would try very hard not to. Not that I would try very hard not to, but I would encourage the person continually to do that. That's a decision that they need to make.
Well, what if the person wasn't prepared to go to the police, but they told you that they saw the killing happen? What would you do?
Am I being asked on the present day circumstances?
Yeah.
Yes, I would take the action of ringing the branch and getting some legal advice on that.
Do you have any knowledge? You're living in Queensland, aren't you?
Yes.
Do you have any knowledge of the law or legal obligations to report knowledge of crimes at all?
Not really. No.
Applying Scripture as we read it in the best way we can to sensitively integrate with modern society.
But you understand the point. There may well be, and we're in one such area where science has taught us a lot in recent years about sexual abuse and how to appropriately respond to it. But if that science was in conflict with your understanding of the Bible, then the Bible would prevail.
Absolutely, the Bible will prevail. And if I could, Your Honour, that's why hundreds of Jehovah's Witnesses are imprisoned in South Korea, in Taganrog, Russia, Azerbaijan, Eritrea, because they won't budge on a clear Bible principle that will endure forever.
So if the law of the country was to prescribe a mode of behaviour which was in conflict with your understanding of the Bible, what would happen then?
We would apply the words in the book of Acts 5:29 to obey God as ruler rather than men, and as we did here during the Second World War, as thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses did when they refused to come under the Nazi regime. The fact that the government at the time makes a law, Jehovah's Witnesses will always obey Scripture, and that's why we have 28 successful outcomes in the European Court of Human Rights, because we won't budge where there's a clear Bible principle that happens to be in conflict with the government.
For the person involved, but for the whole congregation, it would have repercussions that would flow through.
And the matter was reported to you because you were in a position of responsibility?
Yes.
Did you take any notes?
No, I didn't.
Can you help us?
I may have done at the time, I'm sorry, but...
you may have done.
I may have, but...
Where are they now?
They would have been destroyed.
Why?
We don't like to have any notes outside of what's kept on file in the congregation.
Why don't you like to have notes of a serious allegation?
There are brief notes kept in the file, but all other notes are destroyed.
Why is that?
I guess it's because we don't want them to fall into the wrong hands of other people to find them and they go through them.
What are the wrong hands?
Well, we don't want our wives knowing what our stuff, what sort of things we're dealing with. We don't want other people in the congregation coming across that information. Wording at the time when I signed it, it was a generalisation of the situation, and yes, I guess, Your Honour, I didn't take seriously the wording of it at that time.
Well, here you were reporting on a serious allegation, but you say you didn't take the reporting or the wording seriously at the time.
I don't really know how to answer that, Your Honour. It's what you're saying is probably true, yes.
How would you feel if you'd made the complaint and the person who was reporting on the outcome didn't take seriously the wording in the letter that they were signing?
I can see the point that you're making, sir, yes.
And tell me this, you told us earlier that apart from the touching of the breast allegation, BCB made other allegations to you, correct?
Yes, I believe so, yes.
There's no reference to those allegations at all in this letter, are there?
No.
Why not?
I can't answer that, I'm sorry. Not that I'm refusing to, it's just that I can't think of reasons why they're not in there.
Then you record there, we recommended to him that he be stepped down as an elder, and he agreed to this. Now, that seems to suggest that you offered him the opportunity to step down, and he did, rather than you removed him. Now, is there a distinction to be had? How are we to understand it?
No, it's just an unfortunate choice of words there.
So he was definitely deleted or removed?
Removed, yes.
And then you say in the letter, we feel no further action or restrictions need apply. Why was that? Did you consider other actions or restrictions which might be imposed?
In the case of a judicial committee, restrictions against commenting and having parts on meetings and things are what we refer to as restrictions. At this time, we didn't believe that Bill Neal need to have those restrictions put upon him.
Well, what about not having church meetings, Bible studies in his home? That strikes as an appropriate or potentially appropriate restriction which might offer some safety.
I agree, yes. I don't think that action was taken at the time.
Well, it wasn't taken. The point is, did you consider it?
I can't recall considering it, no.
And then if we look at the last paragraph of the letter on the second page, or second last actually, towards the end, it says, also, brothers, I would recommend that once this has died down and it appears that Brother Neil again has the freedom of speech, that he be recommended as an elder again so that he can be of help in the congregation, as he has done in the past. By this dying down, you mean once the controversy has abated, I take it?
It would take a long time, many years in fact, for that to have died down. That's, again, it's an unfortunate wording. In hindsight, we would have worded that much differently to what it is there. Matters of this nature take many years for, if ever, to die down completely.
Well, that was really the focus of your concern there about in taking action against Mr. Neil was about his reputation. Is that right?
Not at all, no.
Well, his reputation in the congregation, his freedom of speech.
His, sorry, what was the questioning again?
Well, that was at the centre of your concern in deciding to remove him as an elder, was his reputation in the congregation.
Not so much his reputation, but how to word it?
Well, it suggests your concern is with his efficacy as an elder.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's right.
I used to celebrate birthdays up until 5 years old. No birthdays, no Christmas.
I'll convey an apology to Your Honour, Commissioner. Technology. See, your concern as an elder there, as I understand it from this letter, was about the proper functioning of your organisation. Is that right?
Yes.
It wasn't about the protection of children in your congregation.
Probably not.
It wasn't about what support you could offer to BCB.
That must have had some bearing on it, but yeah, it was more with his qualifications to teach.
So that, looking back on it now, can you see that taking the abuser to somebody's home is totally inappropriate?
Yes.
One other aspect, and that is as a soldier, as a Jehovah's Witness, that as a soldier of Christ, you are essentially in a theocratic warfare against those that have a different view of religion. Is that the case?
No, I don't think that's
Well,
the
are
case.
you aware of the doctrine of theocratic warfare?
No.
Never heard of it.
Well, I've heard the expression, but I'm not really sure what it means.
But you don't know what it means?
No.
So if you're not satisfied that this person will not offend again, then you won't reprove. You'll disfellowship.
Yes.
And when the person's disfellowshipped, they then can still attend meetings and so on, but under some restriction, is that right?
Under a lot of restrictions.
Yes. And members of the congregation cannot associate with them socially.
Socially or spiritually.
Yes. But the person is still otherwise in the world and can associate with people outside of the church.
Yes.
And you don't take into consideration, do you, how people outside of the church might be kept safe from such a person whom you're not satisfied will not reoffend?
If they were outside the church and they were a close friend, I would tell them.
Well, and how would you know if they're a close friend and they're outside of the church?
Now, if they're a close friend of mine.
A close friend of yours?
If I was.
Yes.
If I associated with them.
What about people who are not close friends of yours, others than outside of the church? You don't take any steps, do you, to protect them from this potential reoffending? You don't, do you? You're concerned with the congregation principally,
Yeah,
aren't you?
we're concerned with the congregations. We are shepherds of the congregation.
Yes, and you're not a shepherd to those who are not in the congregation.
No.
And as an organisation, in your experience, you don't seek to protect or take care of children who are outside of the congregation.
That's a broad statement.
Well, I can limit it.
Yeah, limit it,
In
please.
your decision on whether or not to disfellowship someone, you don't take consideration of children outside of the congregation.
Do take consideration of them, but what ability have we got to protect every child in Australia?
Well, what you can do is you can report to the child protection authorities.
And that is done in some cases.
But generally it's not done, is it?
No.
It's not done unless there's a legal requirement for it to be done, is there?